I just wanted to ask, what's the one thing that got you started in comics?
So I hated reading as a child. Like, I hated books with a passion. Like, books were of the devil. They were evil. Kill them with fire. But I was a weird kid that I would watch the news for whatever reason. And they announced on the news that Superman was going to die. And it struck me. It was something interesting that a character like Superman could die. How is that possible? Like, he's like, I didn't know comics. I knew, somewhat about superheroes, but how could this cultural icon die? I need to know how that could happen. And so I told my mom, I was like, hey, I want to read that. She's like, wait, you want to read something? I was like, yeah. She's like, okay. Like, the next day, she comes home, brings like a stack of books this big, slams them down on the table. Was like, read those. 2 hours later, I give them back to her. I thought I had to give the books back. I didn't know I could keep them. Like, we weren't like bookstore goers. I had gotten books from the library. You always got to get those back. So I give them back to her, and she's like, you didn't read these. I'm like, I did, I swear. She's like, what happened in this book? So I ran it down. I'm like, it's Fantastic Four, blah, blah, blah. She picks up another one. I'm like, it's Batman, but there's no Robin in it. I don't know what's going on. I thought they were always together. And so she's like, wow, you really read these? And I was like, they were cool. And I was like, are there any more? And she's like, there's lots more. And I'm like, can I get some more of that? And she's like, well, next week, like payday, because this is really expensive. But it started with that. The biggest thing, though, like afterwards, was like me reading books got me into writing stories and got me into drawing. And I found out that one of my uncles was like really, really into comic book stuff, like comic book art. And he actually was killed when I was 11. And it was kind of out of respect for him. Like, it was like a vow by candlelight where I was like, listen, for my uncle, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make a career out of this where he never did. I'm going to do it. And here I am.
So it's sort of like a comic book.
Yes, my life is a comic book.
Vengeance.
Yes, on the page. That's how I'll do it.
Do you face any like stereotypes, or like do people expect like some type of thing because you're African American?
Yes. I get that, but only from other African American creators. When I deal with non-ethnic, non-black creators, it's generally with open arms. The worst aspect of any sort of racism I've ever gotten were compliments that I don't think that I should have gotten, where people are like, oh, you speak so well, or you're so good at your job.
Those
like,
backhanded compliments.
Yeah, super backhanded. It's like, I speak well for what? Like, I'm not supposed to have been able to speak English because I've been doing it my whole life. What you talking about? So there's that aspect, but I mean, obviously, it's still inadvertently can be a compliment, though obviously it's wrapped in a sincere insult. But most of the time when people say that, it's after they paid me a nice sum of money to do what I do, and then I show them how good I am, so then they're like, wow, you really are good. I'm like, I know, and you've got your, I've got your check to prove it, so thank you. But in terms of other black creators, I do like run afoul of them where they want me to create things often that are about black culture more than anything else. And I have done so. Like my book, The Samaritan, I definitely would bill as a black comic. But The Trouble with Love is not. All of Origins Unknown is not. Wonder Care is not. Because my goal is to create books that speak to different audiences. Not every person of color can understand that idea that I don't have to just speak to one group of people. I can speak to as many as possible in a way that they will all relate to. I don't have to try to pretend like I have one universal project and that's just supposed to equate to everybody. I can actually make something specific for you, for her, for them. I can do those types of things, and it doesn't make me not proud of being African American. It doesn't mean that I don't care about African American struggles. It just means that for my measure of success, I have to be able to do a lot more, and I aim to do a lot more than that. So that's the honest way that it has impacted me, quote unquote, negatively the most. I actually had a lady, I was at a show that was very pro African American creators, and she told me she didn't want to look at my book, The Trouble with Love, because there weren't black people on it. And like that was crazy to me. I was like, wait, what? And she's like, yeah, it doesn't have black people on it. I don't want to look at it. I was like, you know what it's about? She's like, no. I was like, this dude is a superhero. He cheats on his wife, falls in love with somebody else. She's like, what? I was like, you want me to show black people that way? She's like, well, no. And I was like, there's a reason why there's not a black dude on the cover. But I mean, it was just kind of my little way of getting back at her. But yeah, I've dealt with that before, and it's kind of grimy, but it's people's understanding of things. History hasn't always been kind to us, and I get that, but we don't have to respond by being just as stalwartly back, as other people have been towards us.
So I have a friend that's upset at the fact that Michael B. Jordan played the Human Torch in the last movie, and He's not. He's black,
right?
So I kind of get where he's coming from. But do you think that there's a failure of colored representation in comic books?
No. And here's why. When we say that, most of the time what people point to are the mainstream guys like Marvel and DC. And the thing is that while they are considered the mainstream, they're really not the majority of books out there in the world. Like, there are so many people that are producing books now that I'm fairly certain that if you look for any form of representation, you could find it. Somebody is creating it. The only problem is that you have to do the legwork in order to find it. Marvel, DC, those are the easy ones. Those are the ones that are going to be spoon-fed, coming to you week in, week out. You go to the comic shop every Wednesday. Everybody knows I can get this batch of goodness. And they want their representation in that easy, fixed dose. Well, no, that's not going to happen. If it's worth asking for, it's worth seeking out. And that's the thing that most people have to understand. Michael B. Jordan being Johnny, I didn't like it either. But not because it was making a white character black. It's because I think Michael plays a very strong character, a very intellectualized character, very, very well. In the movie Chronicle, which kind of brought him and Josh Trank together, his character Steve was the man. Like, he was the coolest. He was, class president. He was obviously smart. That dude was Reed Richards to me. Like, I was like, yes, that dude I can see. Miles Teller, I feel like he plays the class clown better than anybody. So he was definitely like more of a Johnny Storm, type actor in my opinion. So I always felt like that was the thing that they got wrong. It wasn't that they made Johnny black. It was just that they made Michael B. Jordan Johnny as opposed to Reed. I would have loved for him to be Reed. I think he would have been like really good as Reed. But I also didn't hate the series or the movie. Like, it's not great. It's not great. I will wholeheartedly admit that. But where everybody was all vitriol and evil and mean about it, it's actually pretty good for the first 2/3 of the movie. Like, it's not garbage. So I guess I can kind of see where your friend is coming from, but I would implore him to look up more venues, more outlets, things like that, to find the representation that he wants to see. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason I have that question is, as a kid, up until a certain point, I thought every superhero was white.
Really?
Every superhero. And then I started to look into, like, Black Panther.
Right.
And Luke Cage.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think. And then I was on Netflix, like, maybe about a year or two ago, and now I've seen a movie called The Condor.
Yeah.
And he's Mexican.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay.
There's a lot of characters from multiple backgrounds. The thing is that people don't necessarily know where to find them, and that's the truth. They don't know where to find them. Mass market media, they typically pick the characters that work universally, and so far it has been proven that most of those guys are, non-ethnic characters, which is fine. That has been the way things have gone for a long time. But, again, I always point at Blade. Blade was a awesome movie. Like, it kickstarted like the modern comic book movie phase, and this was a black character that most people didn't know anything about. So there's a different sort of opportunity if you look for it. Like I said, that's the thing. You gotta look for it, though.
Yeah, I think I can touch on that because I didn't know Blade was a comic book character until I got older. I just watched those movies and I was like, oh, God.
Like, he's awesome. But, I mean, it's Wesley Snipes. He kicks people in the face. But, yeah, once you realize, like, that's a comic book character, then it puts it in a whole new light. And that's a big thing that a lot of different people, filmmaking-wise, have been talking about, is how some people have like made things cool by not treating it like a comic book. The X-Men movies weren't really treated, like the good ones at least, weren't treated like comic book properties. They were treated like sci-fi, adventure teams or things like that. So they didn't really focus on them as comic book material, and that's one of the reasons why they work so well. So it's a lot of different, components and aspects of things, but the end all, be all, end of the day type thing is, if you want to make it, if you want to find it, it's out there. Like, there's no two ways about that.